Welcome to Scotland. Come in, grab a deep-fried Mars bar, a rowie, or some heroin. We're a progressive nation and we love freedom. Not like that fake American freedom where you can get free bullets with every Happy Meal but somehow haggis is still illegal. Like, that. And we also enjoy free healthcare, free education, free prescriptions, free bus travel for the under 22s and the over 60s, free dental care for everyone under 26, and our tap water might as well be laced with manna from the heavens.
Wow. Pure wow.
And who can forget that time when a British immigration vehicle was blocked and surrounded on a street in Glasgow after they tried to detain two Indian men who had lived here for over 10 years. And while we're not completely exempt from bigotry, it's safe to say that we don't really get it as bad as they do elsewhere. When it comes to transphobia, the Americans have Matt Walsh, Ben Shapiro, the English have Maya Forstater, Melanie Phillips, and yes, even J.K. Rowling was born in Gloucestershire, and I, for one, will take no responsibility for her. And as for Scotland, well, you could say that we're not sending our best. And as an example, let's talk about the Vagina Lady. There's a Scottish turf whose nickname is the Vagina Lady. Yeah. Okay, this story is a bit weird, so we should start with a hypothetical. Suppose you saw a news headline that read, "Man goes to trial after calling his ex-girlfriend a dumb bitch." Now, depending on the kind of media you consume, you might look at that headline and say something like, "What f***ing state of this country, right? F***ing free speech and that, f***ing George Orwell. Cause I don't agree with what he said, right? I don't agree with what he said, but I will fight to the death for his right to say it," and all that. Or you could take the Giga Chad Hardman approach and say something like, "Okay, is this really what happened? After all, the headline says he was put on trial after calling his ex-girlfriend a dumb bitch. Like, okay, in the same way that he was also put on trial after tying his shoelaces?" And then you'd maybe read the article to find out that he was actually screaming the words dumb bitch into a megaphone outside her house at 3 in the morning. And then you might wonder, why the was the headline written in that way? What kind of worldview were they trying to cater for? So if one day you saw a headline that said something like, "Women dragged through disciplinary after saying women have vaginas during a seminar on trans issues," what would you think then? Because that headline is actually real. In 2021, a woman named Lisa Keough was investigated by her university after her classmates accused her of making offensive comments and behaving in a disrespectful manner during class discussions. Pay attention to that word behaving, by the way. According to, well, we'll get to that in a minute, the investigation was over her claims that women have vaginas, that not all men are rapists, and that trans women shouldn't be allowed to compete in women's sports. Huge! If it turns out to be true. First, it's worth mentioning that all the allegations against her ended up being dismissed. She sat her exams, graduated, and all good. Well, not quite. So, universities do have an obligation to investigate every claim that comes their way. And because students have this tendency to be a bunch of weaseling little bastards, a lot of these investigations are just a formality that only lasts a couple of days. But in this case, the investigation lasted over 2 months, and of all times, it happened during her final exams. Which is kind of rough, isn't it? I don't think anyone would be especially upset if I said that a student being investigated for 2 months just because she said women have vaginas is a bit of an overreach. If it turns out to be true, which it's not. So here's the problem. If Lisa really was investigated because she said women have vaginas, why was she found innocent? She never denied saying that. On her own website, she says she never denied saying it, and she's even been nicknamed by her political allies as the Vagina Lady. A perfectly reasonable feminist label. So she did say it, she admitted to saying it, and the university didn't reprimand her. How was she cleared then, if that was the thing she was being investigated for? Unless It wasn't. If you look at the newspaper headlines, you'll see that they alternate between saying she was investigated for saying women have vaginas and after saying women have vaginas, which both mean two very different things. In the university's letter to Lisa, they insist that the allegations were not in relation to her personal opinions, which she is entitled to, but rather to alleged behavior in class, including online breakout rooms. Even where they mention her inappropriate comments, they also highlight that she was accused of behaving in a disrespectful manner during class discussions. What those inappropriate comments are, they don't actually say. After the story went public, a spokesperson for the university said that Lisa was not subject to disciplinary action for expressing so-called unacceptable opinions about gender identity or any other topic. Instead, they simply describe it as an initially complex complaint about her behavior in class. And here, we can already see why the investigation might have taken longer than expected. They even mentioned that breakout room sessions were not routinely recorded, and one class recording was stopped due to sensitive disclosure made by another student. So, we have conflicting stories here, and clearly, the journalist who wrote this article seems to have chosen a side. He's acknowledged the university's position, but then chosen to put it at the very end of the article and decided to put this in the headline anyway. Why would you do that, Tom? Did you have any reason to doubt the university's claim? I wouldn't think so, given that the only source we have for the claim that Lisa Keough was investigated because she said women have vaginas is none other than Lisa Keough. And what's more suspicious is that Lisa seems very reluctant to acknowledge the details given by the university. In her statement to the Free Speech Union, she said, "Pointing out that women are born with reproductive organs is now something you cannot say because it is thought to be discriminatory against men who identify as women. But that's not true, is it? If you were investigated for saying women have vaginas, you would have been found guilty." And incidentally, this 3-page press release mentions the word behavior exactly 0 times. In the article that seems to have taken her side, all we have is a quote from her saying, "I was targeted because of my gender-critical views. It was a modern-day witch hunt." Well, that seems reliable. But why would you want to deflect from the claims about your behavior, Lisa? What were you doing in the breakout room sessions, Lisa? Well, I don't know and I don't care. What I do care about is the fact that the British press and even a local MP were so eager to jump on this story, which personally I have doubts about. Because as well as being a vagina lady, Lisa Keough is also a liar. In August 2021, Lisa tweeted out this picture of an ambulance on a motorway with a pride flag on it and said, "So, I have been in England over the weekend, and what a great time was had. On my journey, however, I came across a political ambulance. Surely the NHS should remain neutral." I love that. The institution that uses taxpayers' money to provide free healthcare only became political when it put a pride flag on an ambulance. But anyway, someone in her replies very sharply pointed out that the ambulance was actually from the St. John's charity and not the NHS. To which Lisa doubled down and said it had NHS written along the side. "I would have got a picture, but it had sirens on and I wasn't quick enough when it went past." As if anyone couldn't look up pictures of St. John's ambulances just in case they decided to very illegally slap an NHS logo on in broad daylight, and find out that not only is there no NHS logo, but that the St. John's sign is on the back of the ambulance, which she could see when she was taking the picture. I really can't stress this enough. This person, this vagina lady, went down to England for a weekend, had a great time in England, which is, by the way, an act of treason, and then on her way home, saw an ambulance with a pride flag on it, pretended it was an NHS ambulance, and then got angry about it. Like, what is your life? I posed the question to her at the time and she hasn't commented. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she's a law graduate, can this vagina lady be trusted? Well, I'm not convinced, and for any locals watching, I think this is something worth keeping in mind given that Lisa has very recently just announced her candidacy for the Alba Party. But why did I focus on this story? There are quite a few transphobes in Scotland who have a lot more power than Lisa does, but there are a couple of reasons I chose to talk about this one. Firstly, it's a very good lesson in media literacy. News outlets want you to click on their articles. If you want to publish a story about a student who got investigated by her university over her behaviour only to get ultimately cleared, you might have some difficulty because that happens all the time. However, if the accused starts going around saying that she was investigated because she said women have vaginas, well, now you have a story. You can say student investigated after saying women have vaginas, and technically you're not even lying. But all the same, a headline like that might lead your readers to draw a false conclusion. Or worse, another journalist might pick up that story, misread it, and then put a headline of their own saying, student gets investigated for saying women have vaginas. And if you're a very particular kind of journalist, Tom Gordon, any information that contradicts your headline can just be placed at the bottom of the article, which, let's face it, is the bit people are least likely to read. Still, it takes a bit more than a walloper like Lisa to turn this into a news story. Which brings us to the second point. Why is any of this transphobic? Well, I could do the whole thing and say that Lisa's very unsettling insistence that women have vaginas is probably not motivated by a passion for scientific accuracy so much as a very obvious desire to exclude trans women from the category of women. And also to exclude women with Mayer-Rokitansky-Kuster-Hauser syndrome, apparently. But as far as transphobia goes, I think Lisa's comments are relatively toothless. Whether it's lying about the ambulances or the optical shit show of presenting as a feminist who seems hell-bent on reducing women down to their sexual organs, she's not exactly an expert at playing the media. For me, the issue is more in the way that this became a story. I don't know about you, but if someone told me that a student was potentially getting kicked out of university because she said that women have vaginas, I would probably be a bit skeptical. I feel like if you wanted to tell that story, you would probably need a bit of priming. And the journalists who printed this story probably needed to have a few biases before eating it up in the way that they did. They'd probably have to have some pre-existing beliefs, like universities are being overrun by a censorious trans rights mob, hell-bent on silencing women who have the courage to speak up about their vaginas, to rob them of their womanhood, to steal their fannies, to snatch their snatches. They're not, obviously, which is why stories like this can't exist without a good deal of exaggeration and deceptive framing. So Lisa isn't really the issue here. What she did was little more than a pathetic grab for attention, but she wasn't able to do it alone. What she needed was a media ecosystem that was already primed to accept her side of the story without scrutiny. She needed people like this to prioritize her side of the story whilst relegating the university's comments to the bottom of the article in a display of confirmation bias so blatant it should honestly be taught in schools. And articles like this only reinforce the delusion that produced them in the first place. It's both the cause and the effect of a culture that sees the pursuit of trans rights as something fundamentally irrational and authoritarian. And given that those most likely to support the pursuit of trans rights are, of course, trans people, the point is also to smear them. Which is worth considering the next time you try to say something like, "Of course I support trans people, I'm only against those trans rights activists." I don't care for this point. If the goal of Lisa's story was just to protect the free speech rights of students, well, she didn't need to. Her speech was protected. And her insistence that the process is the punishment is nothing but a desperate stretch that I'm not going to entertain. But if the goal of this story was to smear trans people, it succeeded. But anyway, Lisa, just in case you found your way here, hello, I really need to know why you lied about that ambulance. I mean, my DMs are open and it's honestly driving me insane, so thanks.